Australia may be open for business, as the Prime Minister so often says, but not if foreign buyers of existing houses have put their money in illegally. In his latest update, the Treasurer has shone a light on almost 200 active investigations into property purchases by foreigners. Many may have to sell up if they've bought an existing residential property illegally, and the deadline for harsh penalties on that is the 1st of December, when new laws come into force. Joe Hockey's now got the tax office on the job, and it's also trawling through 88,000 property purchases made by temporary residents, some of whom may now need to sell as well. He's not pretending, though, that this is a solution to rising property prices in Sydney and Melbourne, but it could result in more stock going on the market.
This is the tip of the iceberg. There's a considerable way to go. The data matching powers of the Australian Taxation Office are formidable, and they will give us the power to look right across the system. This does us no damage whatsoever as a destination for foreign investment, none whatsoever, because this is about the integrity of the current laws. The Australian Taxation Office has found a rich vein of opportunity in relation to the unlawful purchase of real estate combined with potential taxation fraud.
$2.8 million once.
Established properties owned by temporary residents is 88,000 in Australia. That's temporary residents, so a lot of those are complying with the law, but they have to sell when they leave the country. And we have a deep suspicion that a number of people have left the country but haven't actually complied with the requirement to sell the properties. That's why the data matching for the first time with the Department of Immigration is going to be so important. The Australian Taxation Office, because of its extensive investigative powers, together with its resources, is able to find that there is an obvious link between people unlawfully purchasing real estate and not paying their fair share of tax. But I'd say in relation to suggestions of a property bubble in Sydney or Melbourne, the response is clear. Build, build, build. That's what we want to see. More construction and housing. If housing were unaffordable in Sydney, no one would be buying it. People are purchasing housing in Sydney. It's expensive. As a multiple of average weekly earnings, it is expensive.
Right, so that's foreigners buying into real estate. Let's turn now to foreign foods. We're about to show you the next range of ideas coming on the government's promise to label foods according to where their ingredients come from. But you might remember that this began back in February, soon after trouble with a batch of berries. And back then, the government said there was an urgent need for better labelling on the amount of Australian content in foods.
I'll just whack this on.
This is it here.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, just whack it out there.
People want to know more
So we're trying, are we?
about where their food, where their products are coming from. That's why it's important that we grasp this particular nettle and actually make a difference.
That's a lovely Wagga Wagga.
Okay.
Riverina.
Is that a fact? Yeah, okay.
This matter is urgent. We are giving it our absolute priority. It can be fixed and it will be fixed.
1 baby capers, 2 latex gloves, medium.
Latex gloves. Yeah.
I want a submission to Cabinet by the end of March because we have to get on. The people of Australia want better country of origin labelling, and this government is determined to deliver it to them.
You having fun, Tony?
Yeah, always, mate, always. Now, what's next?
They want something that is simple, they want something that is diagrammatic, they want something that delivers proportionality, and they want something that's compulsory. And they want it now.
So wind the clock forward 4 months now, and there are 6 options available for the new food labelling system, and a survey is going out to see which one Australians prefer. Well, here are the 6 sets of options, each showing when more than 50% of the ingredients are from Australia and when less than 50% is from Australia. There's a pie chart version showing those amounts. There are also circles that fill or drain depending on how much local local content the food has. A simple sliding ruler version is offered, or a more elaborate version with the Made in Australia logo on it. The Australian map could be an option. And finally, the plainest of all versions, a few written words in a box. Well, no one's more eager than the Agriculture Minister to get this system in place, whatever it might look like in the end. We spoke to Barnaby Joyce about this and other matters a few moments ago. Well, Barnaby Joyce, we're seeing a plethora of options coming forward for the food labelling scheme, but put it to you, they still don't tell us very much about where the ingredients have come from, only the proportion of it which is Australian. In that sense, isn't it coming up short? And is this the regime that you wanted when the journey began in February?
Yes, it is, and no, it's not coming up short. If we look at where we are now, we have something that clearly identifies whether it comes from this nation, from Australia, and the proportion of the substantive ingredient and how much comes from our nation. And we do this by reason of a bar graph or a pie chart. And this is the discussion piece that the Australian people can now give their feedback on. Before, we had something like Made in Australia, and it was anything but Australian. It was probably just put in a smaller package in Australia. And people felt ripped off. They felt that it was their money. They had a right to know exactly what portion of that produce comes from our nation, underpinned by our phytosanitary requirements, our health and safety requirements, and supporting our farmers.
But now, this journey began around the time of the much fabled berries incident. How would this labelling regime have helped the consumer know there that it had come from a country with some problems in this area?
Well, for me, this journey began in around about the 1st July 2005 when I entered the Parliament. But what this clearly would have stated is you would have been able to understand what portion of the substantive ingredients of that package came from our nation, which in this instance would have been none. So you would have had a bar graph with, indicating that none of the ingredients came from our nation. I keep on saying ingredients came from our nation. And then people could make a value judgment. They can still buy the product. There's no law saying you can't, and we welcome them to buy the product. But it's the right of the consumer to have better knowledge, to have better transparency by a labelling system that is both diagrammatic, so you can tell from a diagram, that reflects proportionality, that is simple, and that is compulsory.
And just to clarify on the proportionality, the versions that we've been showing the audience today are two, below 50 and above 50. Is it envisaged that it's more graded than that you'll have 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s? How many percent?
Well, we welcome the public because it's their nation and it's their food going into their mouth. So we welcome the public to say to us if they want more gradations, that they should say so. I know with the over 1 million hits I got on my website at my New England office that this is overwhelmingly supported by the Australian people. Now, if they want more gradations, that's the great thing about this feedback. They get the chance to say it.
But that would come at a cost, wouldn't it, to the industry?
I don't think so. I mean, we always allow tolerances. We're not going to be medieval in how we inscript this, but we make sure that we're not being misleading or mischievous. And what happened in the past, it had Made in Australia, when it came from anywhere but Australia, or made of Australian and imported ingredients, which could be as low as 1% of the ingredients coming from Australia. And that is being mischievous with your money, because I put the statement Australia on there to get an affinity to you, to have a belief that you said, well, this is safe, it's been underpinned by our phytosanitary requirements. In essence, it's misleading, and I was charging a premium for it. We don't believe that. We believe in honesty and transparency in what the consumer buys. This is something the Australian people want, and we will deliver on it. And it's great to see something that you fought for so long actually being delivered.
All right, let's go to another area of your portfolio. We've had the Treasurer out talking today about 200 real estate purchases involving foreigners that are being investigated. He didn't give a breakdown as to the types of properties, but do you have any reason to believe that foreign buyers have illegally purchased farmland and could be included in that caseload?
Well, there's no reason that that is not the case. There is one group that probably knows more than most, and that would be real estate agents and stock and station agents. And I think they have some obligation to make sure that their understanding of who the purchaser is is clearly within the laws of the land.
And do you think they do a better job because of the nature of these regional areas in reporting that than some of the city agents seem to have
I think
done?
they're more particular because they don't want to waste their time, and they get to know, because the purchases are usually more substantial than a house. Probably not so now in the inner suburbs of Sydney, because they're probably more expensive than a lot of the properties being sold. But because they get to know their purchaser with a little bit more detail, they've probably got more of an idea than someone who's just knocked something down at an auction.
They're conflicted though, aren't they? They still want to get the sale. Are they the best policemen in this regime?
Well, I'm an accountant and I had to abide by the laws, and I would be, if I was aware that someone was breaking the laws, I had an obligation to tell people about it. I couldn't just charge them a fee and close my eyes. I mean, that's with any professional organisation. You've got to be aware of the laws and abide by them, and assist the authorities if you think that someone is in breach of them.
And would you be seeking briefings on to try and keep a track of rural property holdings that might be caught up in this net? Because it sounds like there's going to be a lot more of it as the tax office in particular gets into data matching and other work.
Well, let me explain one of the anecdotal conversations that I've had with a stock and station agent, a real estate agent, who said to me this. He said, well, Barnaby, I hated you because of your part in bringing about tighter Foreign Investment Review Board guidelines. He said, because I believe down the track it might slow some of the purchases down. But he said, at the moment, every tyre kicker's turned into a buyer. They're all rushing in, making sure they get their purchase through before the new laws came about, and they're in now. And the other thing he said to me, you will be amazed at how much in this district is now foreign owned.
Okay, one to watch there. Israel and cattle cruelty, another case has come to light, but it appears your department has already, completed its investigations into that?
No, what we've done is on the 27th of May we became aware of this. We put in the proper suspension. This organisation that was actually receiving the cattle, they do have CCTV cameras on board. There was not the proper stunning process for these cattle. What it clearly shows is that our SCAS system, our export supply assurance system, that our nation has, no other nation that exports live cattle does have, is working because there's the clear negotiations and cessations of exports to this abattoir till we've reviewed exactly what went on. We believe that it was the stunning mechanism was not properly applied. It's not that they didn't try to stun the animals, it was ineffective, and that's why the animals became part conscious, and that's why we have what I believe is a very distressing view. But this is something where I think this abattoir is actually trying to do the right thing. They've now put in more CCTV cameras, and I want to make sure that we don't lose one of our greatest exports, or our greatest rural exports, which is live cattle. Gosh, we need them. We're losing coal sales, we're losing iron ore sales, they're falling. Let's not make sure that we inhibit other forms of earning export dollars, and let's make sure that our nation, the only nation that has these tripwires in place, this assurance scheme in place, that we don't persecute it to be replaced by other nations that don't have any of these controls in place.
All right, just finally on another issue of the day, we are finding more MPs discovering their voice on the issue of same-sex marriage. For its part, the National Party, does it have anything to fear from going into a conversation about a free vote or a conscience vote?
I think this is an issue that's been discussed a number of times. People clearly know my position. I believe in marriage, traditional form of marriage. I believe it's all basically about the kids. Kids have a right to know who their biological mother and biological father is. I think everybody has that right, and they have they should have the greatest opportunity to have a long-term, warm and engaging relationship with their biological mother and their biological father. That's a position I hold. I know it's a position others don't.
But getting it to the point of a free vote in your party?
Well, I believe in the traditional form of marriage. I don't think we can redefine the term of marriage. I don't think it's about redefining marriage more than marriage equality. And there will be a debate about this, no doubt. But I think it's very important that people, state their opinion. I've stated mine.
All right, Barnaby Joyce, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, among the many topics covered there with Barnaby Joyce, obviously at the outset was food labelling and the new regime, which has gone out for public consultation. But what's the industry's view? Well, political reporter Susan McDonald spoke to Gary Dawson from the Food and Grocery Council just a short time ago.
These options are really about clarifying to consumers what that term local and imported or imported and local ingredients means, which is on packaging now and causes a good deal of confusion and is the subject of a lot of the concern with current labelling. So it's really a way of applying some more clarity there by saying it's more than 50% Australian ingredients, it's less than 50% Australian ingredients. So that's a useful step forward.
And the government is putting this out to consumers. Is there any point in doing that?
I think it's very important to do that because changes to food labelling do add costs, and it would be unfortunate to simply add costs with no consumer benefit. So it's important to do the consumer research to see if it hits the mark with consumers and is something that they will respond to. I mean, ultimately, consumers make their decisions based on a whole range of different considerations. Often it's purely on price, for example. So trying to get to the heart of, well, will consumers understand this? Will they respond to it? Will it change their preference? Is quite an important thing to do because that allows you to weigh up then the costs against the benefits, which is a key principle with any regulatory change.
Do you accept that these don't really tell us a whole lot more than what we have at the moment, as you say, local and imported ingredients?
Well, exactly. That's one of the points we've raised consistently, that you have to be confident that this is going to actually improve the level of consumer understanding in order to go down this path. If it doesn't, then what's the point? Then it simply adds costs without much benefit.
And do you think this does improve that?
Well, it clarifies what those statements mean. Currently there's a lot of criticism of food companies for putting on their labelling local and imported or imported and local ingredients. Now they do that because that's what's required in effect under the current law. This change would simply provide some more clarity on that by saying it's more than 50% Australian produce, it's less than 50%. There's a lot more detail still to be worked out here, including how consumers would respond to that. But that's the intent behind what's being proposed here.
And how hard is it going to be for producers to comply with these types of labels? Take the example of a packet of muesli. How do you break that down from that packet of muesli to this label?
Well, there are complexities around food processing that stem from just the range of products you're trying to cover with the change to the law, and the characteristics of different food products. So with any change like this, it does add complexity and it does add cost. So for example, you'd need certainty around is this referring to all ingredients or just the key characterising ingredients? Is there an ability to average out over the course of a year? Because for some products, over the course of the year, the sourcing of the ingredients might change, determined by seasonal factors, for example. So there's a lot of detail still to be sorted out, even with what's been put out today.
So then, based on what you've seen, does the Food and Grocery Council support a label like this?
Well, we support clearer literal statements, potentially backed up by more information being made available through other means, say online or through apps and so forth, to supplement what's on the label. And that's because given the range of topics or the range of information that consumers might be interested in, it's very hard physically to fit it all on the label or to prioritise, because you might be more interested in where the produce was grown. Another consumer might be more interested in whether it was sustainably sourced, or might be more interested in the nutritional content and so forth. So the range of information that consumers want is almost unlimited, and that creates a problem, obviously, for food processors in terms of what they put on the label. The answer, we think, is to think about the label simply in terms of the basic factual information, supplemented by websites, smartphone apps, whatever, which increasingly are used by consumers to find out more detail about what they're buying.
Okay, so to foreign fighters now, and most people would be aware that the government's ordered a national conversation on citizenship, including when and how terrorists could be stripped of it. Former Minister Amanda Vanstone's in that chat, boots and all. She took aim at Tony Abbott for being what she called lazy, sneaky, or both, with his idea to also strip citizenship from those terrorists who could be eligible to get it from another country. It's a two-way conversation, not with the Prime Minister, but with his Immigration Minister, Peter Dutton. He's politely reminded Amanda Vanstone that a lot's changed in the war on terror since she was around.
I wouldn't criticise a minister from the Howard government because I thought the ministers in the Howard government did a great job, as I do believe the ministers in the Abbott government are doing a good job. And I think we have the threat of terrorism as it was in the Howard government days, but the threat now is greater than it's ever been for our country in the past. ASIO has 400 high priority cases that they're investigating right now. There are over 110 Australians who are fighting in Syria, in the Middle East otherwise. We have over 30 Australians who have now been killed in conflict in the name of terrorism. And we have over 150 Australians who we've identified who are taking part in providing support to those in the Middle East, fundraising, training, preparing themselves otherwise. This is the most significant threat that we faced in relation to terrorism in our country's history, and we intend to deal with that in a very strong way. That's what we're proposing in these measures, with all of the appropriate safeguards. As I say, this law, as we propose, it's been operating in the UK since 2006 and will have a very important underlying principle of not rendering somebody stateless, of making sure that there is oversight by the courts, and I think that's a balanced approach.
Now, the day when the Liberal Party has its conversation about same-sex marriage must be drawing closer, because more people are finding their voices, especially those who want the status quo preserved. Within the coalition, they're organising to put their side of the argument. Scott Morrison wants the Marriage Act left alone, and he also wants the ethnic community brought into the discussion too.
I think there is a lot more discussion, a lot more investigation into these issues, and the presumption that there's only one question to be put here, I think is frankly presumptuous. I mean, there are migrant communities and ethnic communities all across this country who have very strong views about this issue, not just those from, Christian, Anglo-Saxon backgrounds, but right across the community. And I don't think a lot of those voices have been heard yet in this debate. And I think it's important that this decision isn't imposed upon people around the country, and that it's properly ventilated and everyone's view gets to get worked through. The idea that there's just one answer and this has to be done now, and it has to be forced on the Australian population without further discussion for people to reflect, I'm very uneasy about that. And so I think it's time for people to have a bit of a breather, to think about this and to consider what the other options are. And rather than lecturing everybody about what should be done and when it should be done and what it should look like and all the rest of it, I think there should be time for the country to think about this, for politicians to think about it. And I think there's a way through this, because on the other side, whatever the outcome is, I would hope this wouldn't be a thing which sort of tears the country apart.
And Scott Morrison's suggestion that there could well be a variety of options to choose from does seem to be borne out by some of the suggestions made, which now range from a plebiscite to a change in the role that the Commonwealth plays in registering and regulating, if you like, the Marriage Act. So plenty to watch on that in the coming weeks.